what kinds of.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, you never know what kind of amazing gems might come out of this session.
That's right.
If throughout this session, if you have any specific questions at this time, I'm going to ask you to post it in either the chat. There'll be an opportunity to do it through the presentation, which I'll show here in a moment using your phone or your computer, or you can raise your hand and I can get you to unmute yourselves. And let's see, and how that happens is usually, let's see, where's the raise your hand? Do you guys see
I
it?
think it's on the bottom.
Since I'm sharing my screen, my my interface is all kind of jumbled all over the place right now.
I think it's under participants. No, maybe not. Let's see.
Under reactions, I think. Yeah, there we go. Under reactions, it's kind of like a little emoticon type thing. You should be able to raise your hand there. Yeah. So
and Debbie Nance already raised her hand.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie, for demonstrating that. All right.
And so a thumbs up.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there's all kinds of goodies you can do there. All right. So why don't we get started? My name is Dr. Irfan Vafai. I'm with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension based out of Overton. Today, we're also joined by Dr. Vikram Baliga from Texas Tech University and Dr. Eric Rebeck from Oklahoma State University. We're going to kind of, this is kind of an open-ish type session. Hopefully at this point, you've had a chance to view some of the trainings, maybe even complete the quiz, maybe you've even started contributing. So we're starting to get some contributions and hopefully we would take this time to answer any questions. If this year is anything like last, we got almost about 20,000 contributions last year and hundreds of you citizen scientists, volunteers. And so answering a lot of these questions on a one-to-one basis can unfortunately be a little bit time prohibitive for us. So we've tried to answer a lot of the common questions. We thought we'd take this session to try and answer a lot of questions up front so that hopefully things go kind of smoothly throughout the season. So hopefully you're already quite familiar with the Pollinator project, web page or landing page, and that's at sixleggedaggie.com/pollinator-project. That's where you're going to access all the steps to actually get involved this year. And there is an additional training module and an updated training module. So the actual contributing part of it, that's the part 2 of the training, has been updated, and part 3 is completely brand new, provided by Dr. Vikram Baliga on identifying plants, so we can make sure that the plant identifications we are doing are up to snuff, they're nice and accurate, so that the information we're generating is a little bit more reliable. And I've seen already in some of the contributions, we asked for the binomial Latin name. I've seen in some cases people hit other, and then in the other box just put a common name of a plant. And when that happens, there's a good chance that data might not be included in the final data set. We don't want that to happen. But like I said, since we're getting over 20,000 contributions, we're not typically going through all that data line by line. We're writing pieces of program and code to read that data for us and consolidate it. So that's why it's very important to do that binomial Latin name. And if that binomial Latin name is not there in the database already, that's when you hit other and make sure you accurately type in the binomial Latin name in the field that kind of appears afterwards. Like I mentioned on the website, there is a Q&A section that hopefully will answer a lot of your questions. But at this time, we'd like to make it kind of open-ended. So you can, like I mentioned, either put something in the chat. You can use your phone to go to pollev.com/irfanv202, and you can write in there, type in a question. It'll pop up here on the slideshow, or you can, as Debbie has done here, raise your hand. So Debbie, I don't know if you're just doing a demonstration or not, but I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself in case you do have a question. And you should be able to unmute yourself and participate this time.
I wanted to let you know that it shows on my screen the chat is disabled.
Oh, that's interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. Let me see here. Oh, all right. Yeah. Here we go. All right. You should now be able to put things in the chat.
Looks like we have a question from Monta Kennedy.
All right, asked to unmute. Monta, go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. My question is it okay to submit from two varied locations? Like some submissions would be from San Antonio and some observation submissions would be from Bandera.
I would say absolutely, yes. As long as you're still using that location services, or you're pinpointing where you're making that observation, so that we can isolate by location. Yes, that is absolutely fine.
So instead of saying where you click, was it within the last 2 hours, you would just keep that top button so that you could do the location.
That's right.
When
Absolutely.
You're submitting. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, you would hit
And
that
then,
this is a new observation so that you can put in the location information.
Okay. And then when I looked at the most recent training that was the plant identification, it seemed like most of the things, the top 10 that they identified, they were all it seemed common pollinators. Is it okay to just do whatever you want? Like, could you do your tomato plants and that sort of thing? Or are y'all trying to keep it more specific? Like, could you do native out in the pasture or?
So, yeah, I mean, and Dr. Rebeck, you can chime in here if you wish. I think the overall project goals were to determine, or to really answer the question that would commonly get was what plants to put in your garden to attract pollinators.
Right.
So for that reason, you're more than welcome to include native plants out in the pasture, but we ask that you don't focus on that. We really ask the focus be on things that are commercially available that can answer that question again. What do I get to attract pollinators?
Commercially available ornamental plants. Yep.
Yeah,
right. For landscape, for landscape purposes.
For landscaping. That's right.
Got it. Okay. Okay. I think that's what I've got. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We got another hand up from Mickey. Asked to unmute. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay. I did this last year, and I had always had a question when my patch quits blooming completely. Well, once it quits blooming completely, I just took it off my list and didn't report it anymore. But I didn't have a way to, or maybe you don't care, to tell you that's the reason why I removed it from one of the patches I reported.
Yeah, so I think at this time, if it's not in bloom anymore, just don't include it. The assumption is going to be that if that particular plant is not at all reported across several locations, within a particular month, that means it's just not in bloom. So that gives us some information about blooming time of those plants, which is not the central focus of what we're looking at. We're really going to focus more on when that plant is in bloom, is it attracting pollinators? And so if you're not reporting it because it's not in bloom, I mean, that's fine. That's not of particular interest anyway.
And correct me if I'm wrong, on the form, on the entry form, I believe it asks for an estimate of how much of that patch is in bloom. Is that right? And it from 0 to 25%, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and 75 to 100% in bloom, I believe.
Yeah, it's the relative amount of the canopy that's in bloom for that particular plant. So if that plant is in full bloom relative to how much bloom you get on that plant, it'd be that 100% or in that upper category. Yeah. Whereas if it's decreasing in bloom, so it's either senescing or just starting to bloom, it's going to fit in one of those other categories.
Yep.
I have one other question. I did about 15 different plots last year, or more or less. But if you continually have a patch that does not attract any pollinators, do I just, even though it's blooming, do I just keep reporting it? Or just get rid of it?
Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. In biology, we're oftentimes interested in the negative data as well as the positive data. However, if you kind of keep running into the wall with that particular patch, and you've gone out several times and you haven't generated any pollinator data observations, I think it's probably safe to say that's just not an attractive plant to pollinators. And so you don't have to keep wasting your time, even though it's only a minute each time, but you don't have to keep putting effort into that particular patch anymore. So I think, a couple of times entering saying, yeah, we've, we've got 0 pollinators or very, very few pollinators. And then after that, you could probably stop observing that particular patch.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
So a question here in the chat. I saw love bugs bloom on blooming Yopon holly today. Is there a way to report love bugs? There currently is not a way to report love bugs in that format. As I understand, I don't think it fits any of those categories. Do we have a Diptera category?
I don't think so. I think, well, maybe, no, I think it's other.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think we have a way of reporting it. And I don't know that love bugs are considered major pollinators. I wish we had some of our other collaborators on here that might know a bit better. Dr. Rebeck, are you familiar with, I don't think they are considered strong pollinators. Yeah,
I don't, you don't see there much in the literature as being a major group of pollinators, but I think it's useful to at least include it in the other category if we don't already have. I mean, I know we don't have a love bug category specific, but
yeah.
But Diptera in general, I don't think we even have that, do we? Well, we have flies. I think we have, we have hover flies.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we got non-bee flies. So, I mean, it could go into that non-bee fly category there.
Yeah.
So you could report it in there. All right, let's go back and see if I see some more hands up again. Georgette, I've asked you to unmute yourself, so feel free to do so and chime in.
Yes. I have crossvine and it blooms very heavily in April and then stops and then begins blooming again in July at a less than 25% rate. And I counted it last year, but sometimes the bees are so busy with other plants that they ignore it completely, while in April, they are just all over the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you want that type of data?
So a plant that blooms more than once a year during a growing season. I mean, it makes sense that in April, when there's not much else out there, that the pollinators would be visiting those flowers, trying to get at that nectar and pollen, because there's not much else available at the time. And then, essentially when it reblooms in July, that plant is probably masked, if you will, by other plants that are in bloom and maybe more higher preference by pollinators. I guess this kind of relates to the previous question regarding that I think Mickey posed regarding, if you've got a patch that is not productive at all for pollinators, should you continue to observe that patch? So in this case, I think that kind of falls in the same category. You've got a kind of a duplicate blooming time, or not a duplicate, but a secondary blooming time. And if that patch just is not producing a lot of pollinators, and I don't think you really have to put much effort into that patch anymore. I think the most interesting data would be coming from that April observation grouping, because that's when you're getting a lot of activity from those pollinators. Does that make sense?
To some degree, because during the July count, I would get 1, maybe 2 types of pollinators. And I still counted them, but I'm sitting there thinking, during the spring, it might skew the data. And I was a little concerned about that.
Yeah, good. That's a good point.
Yes, I think that's where, and that's where kind of our job is really starting to kick in terms of how to deal with some of these anomalies. So you might have a certain plant that is very attractive to pollinators in certain months, but not others. Maybe it's because of the other types of blooming plants at that time. It might be different by region. So this is where, we're really focusing a lot of our analysis attention this year so that we can provide some good resources for y'all that are a little bit more meaningful regionally. I think with that being said, I think that's where we're still trying to figure out, and you can see Dr. Rebeck kind of thinking as well, like what's the best way to do it. I mean, my thoughts would be, even if it's not attracting pollinators, if it's in bloom and it's not attracting pollinators, I think spending that 60 seconds to, record that data is just as important as when it is attracting pollinators. Because again, if you don't report it, we don't even know it's in bloom, right? We don't have any data on that plant. Whereas if you report
that's
it,
a good point.
Yeah, you report it, we know it's in bloom and we know it's not attracting in that particular time of year. I think that's very important data to include. So I would encourage anytime that plant's in bloom, if you can make that observation on, say, about a weekly basis or so.
Yeah, and I think as we start to kind of look through the data this year in particular, I think that'll sort itself out. I think we'll be able to determine that, hey, we've got the same plant, but it's blooming a little bit later, attracting very few pollinators. I think we'll be able to sort through that data with whatever data mining process we use for the larger data set. So yeah, I think Irfan's right. I mean, it would be useful to at least see that it does bloom a second time during the season, and it may or may not attract pollinators. So I would say continue making that observation when it's in bloom.
Okay, and I have one more question.
Yep.
Does the data that I put in last year carry over to this year? Because I've had so much damage on my plants due to the deep freeze that I don't think some of them are going to be blooming at the same time as they were last year, because it's going to take a long time to recover.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's certainly going to be, we're certainly still analyzing the data both from 2019 and 2020 and looking at how we can integrate it all. And then this year is very similar. The way that we're reporting is very similar to last year. So we learned a lot from 2019, 2020, and this year was going to be very similar reporting. So that data is going to intermingle much easier. And so, yeah, we absolutely anticipate, carrying over, still making use of that data. So certainly we'll see some, year by year variation or some things that we're learning year after year. So it'll keep kind of building up.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I got a couple questions that were sent to me in direct message. One of them is another Latin name question, or this person had asked a Latin name question. It said for geraniums, so this one's gonna be for you, Dr. Baliga, is a Pelargonium interspecific okay? And my concern is about interspecific. Is that a binomial Latin name, Dr. Baliga?
Yeah, so sometimes that's used as if it's a lot of geraniums are crossed between, they're heavily hybridized. So, we'll see Pelargonium crossed or interspecific with something else. And so as far as how it goes in the system, that's a little more complicated, but it typically is part of the nomenclature. And I don't know if our system picks that up well or not, but yes, I would say that is part of the nomenclature.
I'm going to check real quick the website that we use to cross-reference and check our Latin name information. So a little bit of background for y'all, kind of the back end of what goes on is when you type in those Latin names, remember in first year, it was like you had to type it in manually. We're able to cross-check all of those Latin names, even with if there's slight spelling errors. It can also cross-check it against a binomial Latin name database online. And it also gives us the family and the genus and all this other information about that plant that then adds to our information. And then in 2020, that's when we said, all right, if it's a verified Latin name, we can now make this pull down list to make your job a little bit easier. However, in some cases, there are some Latin names that may be, like this one. If it's not in that plant database, if there's not a lot of strong census about what that Latin name really is, then maybe it's not in that database. And so we need to just find an effective way to integrate it into our survey. So I'd say go ahead, and since Dr. Baliga has basically given the thumbs up, go ahead and use that. That means you're gonna have to hit other and enter that name because it's not currently in our drop down. I just checked that. But then from there, we can check it against our database and see if it starts to pull into there. All right, so we got, let's see, what about a patch of plant that is not quite 2 by 2? Should I leave that one out of my observations? Yes, so very important, I think, for standardization of our observations. We want to make sure you're only looking at a 2 by 2 foot area and not anything less. And that's because, obviously a large patch that's like 20 by 20, you're going to count a lot more pollinators in that area. At the same time, if it's just a single plant that's half foot, 6 inches by 6 inches, just in terms of the sheer amount of space that pollinators can occupy, the number is going to be a lot less. So for that reason, it's very important that we standardize to 2 foot by 2 foot area. Now, it doesn't need to be exact. We don't expect you to pull out a measuring tape, but it should be approximately 2 foot by 2 foot area that you're making those observations.
And with that particular patch, Paulette, maybe that's an opportunity to plant more of that plant. Make that patch 2 by 2.
Yeah. Let's see. Here, one on the slide is moths. Yeah, so butterflies and moths are included in the Lepidoptera group, LEPs, so they are reported in there. We got another one here in the chat. I do not have any of my usual pollinator plants large enough to bloom this year. The big Texas deep freeze killed some of my plants. I like that. That should be a trademarked name right there. Forget Winter Storm Uri. It is now called the big Texas deep freeze. Killed some of my plants and has stunted the growth of native plants. I've only seen one wasp and one butterfly on my property so far. I probably will not be able to report until late spring when things may be back to normal. And that's absolutely fine. Again, you kind of want to just start reporting when things are in bloom, and in general, maybe you start seeing some pollinators in your area, right? So not only when they're visiting your one particular plant, because again, we still want to know when there are no pollinators visiting your plant, but at the same time, you don't need to be making observations if there's not a whole lot of insect activity in general in your area yet. So once there's insect activity and you have things in bloom, get to work, get to it, start adding into there.
And I think that'll be fairly common this year across our study region, and we'll see that in the data. We'll see that in the trends of the way that y'all report. But
And welcome to the wonderful world of field research. This is this is very, very typical, right? You have a typical master's student will have 2 years to collect data and write up a thesis and get their master's degree. And those 2 years that they did the project could be completely different in terms of, because of this annual variability you get in climate and weather and what have you. So insect populations, plant blooming periods, those are all going to vary from year to year. So we'll be able to kind of sift and winnow through that variation and come up with a meaningful story. So don't worry about the deep freeze and its effect on killing some plants, delaying bloom time, delaying insect activity. We will sort that out at the end.
Yeah, we had a PhD student who was a major part of this project, was going to survey some insects in China. And then obviously COVID hit, right? Stuff like that. It's like there's all kinds of things. Oh, someone's annotating my slide. Thank you so much.
Hey, nice.
We have to stop the share and reshare again to get some of that off there. Zoom has a pretty bad policy for how to prevent some of those annotations. It just kind of makes it a little bit whatever. All right, so I think was there another question there in the chat? I think there's one more in there.
Yeah, one just came in. In a week, how often should we observe our patch and at different times, correct? Really, there's no limit. to when you go out and do it. I mean, if you can take observations a couple of times a day, every day, for that patch, great. If you can only get to it once a week, also great. It really, we understand that everybody has, busy schedules and different abilities to get out into their gardens and make these observations. So, there's no minimum level of participation in my mind. We do recognize and acknowledge those folks that maybe are looking at this as a little bit of a competition, and they're trying to get the most observations. That's cool too. But really, there's no minimum requirement as long as you can get out periodically during the blooming period of those patches and make some observations.
And I think in the Q&A, I put like as a general rule or as a general suggestion, maybe don't make multiple observations within a day, because that can just start to confound, right? Like if you're seeing a whole lot of honeybees on there and you're like, I see so many, I'm going to come back in 30 minutes again and count that same
Right.
plant. Well, now
Right.
you're starting to inflate the data and make it seem like that plant is very attractive, whereas it's only your particular plant in your region. Maybe that same plant somewhere else isn't as attractive, and all of a sudden we're getting some inflation in the data. And even though we're going to try and adjust for that by observer, so we're going to average perhaps kind of observer effects. Still, it would help, I think, if you just try and stick to one observation of a particular patch within a day maximum. You could do multiple patches within a day, but just of that particular plant, just one patch. And then ideally, I think like with, once a week, if you can observe that particular patch, so there was some consistency. So we can see, is it consistently still attractive over time? How does that attractiveness maybe change as the bloom percentage changes or as the season changes? So it just gives us a good idea. So somewhere within that range, somewhere between once a day and once a week, I think it's kind of a nice spot there.
Probably so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think there's a follow-up question from Elizabeth, and we can have multiple patches to observe each day. I think that kind of, yes, that's, and those patches might be preferably probably different species that you're observing. So we can kind of get more of a robust data set from your particular garden that you're making your observations within. So yeah, multiple patches per day are fine. Yep.
Get this question. Could you send the names of the top 10 plants for 2020 to each participant? This would help me to replace any plants that got frozen with better pollinators. Yeah. So if you've been keeping up with the mailing list and even the project page, right? We've been sending out, it was like almost monthly. Once in a while, I was getting very busy with defending my PhD, so it got delayed a little bit. But for the most part, there was somewhat
excuses.
Yeah, right. You sound like my PhD committee right now. I would send out these updates periodically, and you can actually still go to our website and see the most recent project summary. So you can actually go to there's 2019 data, which is still kind of very raw in format, but it has a lot of the data there. Or you can go to the 2020, and this kind of consolidates some of that data that we had from 2020. This report is from basically near the end of the year, near the end of the season. So it includes pretty much all the data from last year. And if you go there, you can see the top 10 observed plants. So these are not the most attracted to pollinators. These are just which ones y'all spent the most time looking at. But then when you start to go down, you can see here honeybee snapshot. So this is the proportion of observations of a particular plant in which honeybees were actually seen. So basically, anytime this particular plant was observed, I'm not going to try and say that Latin name there. Basically, every time, 100% of the time, honeybees were observed in that particular plant. And this is including only data where it includes at least 4 independent observers, right? 4 different people and a total of 20 observations. So this data isn't just from one person looking at their plant one time. All right, this is going to be at least 20 observations and 4 different observers. And as we scroll on down, you can see this massive chart here that breaks it down by pollinator type and different plants. So near the very bottom is, in theory, the most attractive. Now this is not teasing apart some of the things that we said, like regional effects or seasonal effects. we also still need to go through here and say which ones of these are invasive, or which ones are noxious, or which ones are very thirsty for water, right? So things like that we still need to take into consideration has not been included in this, but at least we'll give you a good starting list of maybe some plants to consider if you want to add some info. Now, if you go to the very bottom of this, you'll see, and we'll always include this in these little updates we send out to you throughout the season. It says help add more plants. These are plants that are close to be included in this list, but are not, because they're just short of 20 observations or just short of 4 independent observers. So here you'll see it needs more observers are these plants right here. So that means that there's probably about 3 observers, independent observers for any of these plants here. And then these plants here need more observations. So maybe you already have this in your garden, and there's already sufficient observers. There's 4 or more people that have it in their garden. You just need to go out there and look at it a few more times while it's in bloom to be included into this chart. So I would encourage you, not to only plant these like attractive ones for now, if you want to contribute to this project, to also consider some of these others that we need some more data on.
Great. Good stuff, Irfan. There was another question in the chat window from Sue Abernathy.
Right.
Is there a minimum outdoor temperature at which we should make our observations? And yes, you're all very aware that insects are cold-blooded animals, and when it's too cold, they are not very active, are they? So, it varies from one insect to the next as to ideal optimal temperature ranges for activity and metabolic process.
Oh.
Uh-oh, we lose Eric.
Oh no, he's frozen. The temperature got too cold.
He was right in the middle of a really good answer too.
He was, yeah. Oh no. Well, while he slowly resumes, while we reboot Dr. Rebeck, he is just an artificial AI. There are certain, a minimum temperature at which you don't expect development or activity of a particular insect. So knowing exactly when that temperature range may be is going to be highly dependent on the insect. I'm going to go ahead and, throw a dart at a board and say anything below 45 or 50 is going to be considered suboptimal. So, if you don't see any insect activity outside, it usually means that, it's going to be a little bit too cold for them to really be active. And at the same time, already in East Texas anyway, during our noontime, it's getting warm enough, right, that we're seeing some pollinator activity. So in general, wait until it gets kind of warm enough throughout the season to actually start making those observations. Let me see if Eric, I've been rejoined by Eric here, making co-host again.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I got cut off midstream. Did you complete my thought?
I completed it. I don't know if it was quite as eloquent as how you would have put it, but yeah.
Thank you, though.
I said around, in summary, I said, below, avoid observations in temperatures below 45 or 50. Kind of look at things above that in general.
Kind of what I was thinking too. Yeah. I was just going to kind of conclude that thought by saying, use your best judgment. If you're not seeing a whole lot of insect activity on that given day, it's a cloudy day, for instance, there's not as much pollinator activity. Even a colder sunny day, there might not be as much activity. Maybe couch that day and start, look forward to another day to make observations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we need to recertify for this year if we previously participated? Yes. So both the training, like I mentioned, the training has been updated. Not only does it include an updated contribution training, but also includes a whole plant ID module, which is brand spanking new by Dr. Vikram Baliga. And then there are some added quiz questions, and we've also increased the requirement from an 80% passing grade to 85%. And so all of those make it kind of necessary. We do ask, and also again, for us, And I think for everyone that's going to be potentially accessing this data or benefiting from it, I think it provides that assurance that this data is reliable, right? That these are personnel that have undergone some kind of training and have passed some kind of a quiz that tests their abilities to show that they can properly identify a plant, they can properly identify the pollinators that this whole data set is based on. So yeah, we do ask you to complete that again.
And that's just as simple as viewing the videos once again and taking the quiz.
That's
Is that right?
That's
Okay.
absolutely right. And that's on that project page. And it's very important that any person actually making observations do that. So if you are entering data for a group of people that are making the observations, it's very important that they all complete the quiz, and that when you're inputting their data, if this is a situation that you're doing, you're inputting their data for them, that you use the email address that they used to complete the quiz to enter that data. Because again, it's very important for us to be able to identify, who are the independent observers, so that we, that's going to be very important to include in our data set.
Yeah.
Because I think there were some major contributors last year that I don't know. I'm going to check this time to see if it's because they are reporting for others and not actually putting their email, the emails of other people in, or is it because they are just going buck wild and spending all day making observations, which is great, but we just need to be able to differentiate between those two.
We should make a video, Naturalists Gone Wild.
Yeah, all standing outside with their phones, just staring at plants.
A bug net, all that.
Yeah.
Binoculars.
This is my 60th observation of lantanas today alone. All right. Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything on the survey. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, nor am I seeing any hands raised. So I'm going to give it another quick moment before we assume that there are no more questions. I may also, why don't I just quickly pull up the Q&A section from our website. Here we go. So if you scroll on further down, if you're not subscribed to the mailing list specific for this project, again, it's on the project page. I highly recommend you do that. I think for some of you, it's been going into your spam folder. So make sure you check that spam folder for this mailing list and get it out of that spam. Because again, it's going to give very important updates. We answer a lot of common questions in there, and we're going to provide some of that data and resources that come out of this project through that mailing list. So I want to make sure that you have access to that as you go through. So again, here's this Q&A section, and let's see. So the survey on the presentation is no longer active. So make sure if you have a question, just put it in the chat, or again, you can raise your hand. Let me make sure I can actually see the participant list. Yeah. Let's see, like for some of the examples that we can kind of go through that are pretty common. Can both annuals and perennials be documented? They can both be included in the study. Again, if you're looking at some kind of a perennial, just make sure that you're only looking at a 2 by 2 foot area patch, right? So if it's much larger than that, just restrict your observation to a smaller area than that. Every year we get asked by some people if they can use a physical form instead of the online form. Since we are a relatively small team, we don't have the capability to enter in the data for you. So you're more than welcome. We have created a little a paper form here that mimics the actual digital form. So you can actually fill this out if you so wish, and then go back to your computer or your phone and enter that onto the computer. But we just do ask, again, make sure that you include the email of the person that actually made the observation and all that information in there for us. Let's see, things about naturally occurring wildflowers, very common question. And I think we already kind of answered that you're welcome to include that, but that is not the focus of this work, right? We really want to focus on plants that are commercially available. Let's see. Yeah, if the form is not accepting your Latin name, right? So there is a field. Let's see. Let me get to the actual form. Did we lose Eric again?
Looks like we did.
Oh no. When you get to the actual form, right? So you can enter the Latin name in here. So, as I start to type it, it filters down and finds my particular plant. Now, if that particular plant is not in there, right? Vikram Balagosa is not in there. I'm gonna have to type in other. And as I do that, you'll notice this extra little box shows up right here. And then I can add that in there. And that does mean that every time you're reporting that plant, you're going to have to manually enter it in there until we have a chance to update this form, which I try and do every 2 or 3 months. It's a little bit cumbersome, so it's not done very frequently, but you can go in there and check. Now you can also check for us. Let's see, the plantlist.org. Yeah, you can check here to see, well, I want to make sure that the binomial Latin name I'm entering in there is going to actually show up in their database. So I can type it in there and search, and you can see it's not showing up. If I go back, here we go, it's Pelargonium interspecific. So now we can check this one, right? That was one of the specific questions. So it goes to like several different potential species. It really recognizes the genus. So that means that we would be able to at least pull the data down to genus level.
And sometimes on that, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
The interspecific cross is sometimes abbreviated as an X, like you see on this list here. So I see it written both ways, probably in, commonly like you'll see it that way. So that may be a better way to enter that plant. That might make it more likely to be on one of our lists.
So you're saying interspecific could mean crossed with any of these.
Right, correct. Right.
So then at that point, I would argue it might help if you knew what it was crossed with. If you could include that information in there, I don't know if that's usually on the label, but that would then allow us to know specifically what plant you're looking at, which is important, right? Because if you're just giving us a genus, there can be a lot of variation in the size of the flowers, how attractive they are, pollinators, like everything, even within a genus. So unfortunately, that information isn't nearly as valuable as knowing the species. And even then, it would have been more valuable if we could have known cultivar as well. But there's just a whole other suite of challenges that we face when we get into there. And that's why, we ask for it if you know it, but it's not required.
Irfan, there's a couple of questions in the chat about your paper form or that link to the paper form.
Yeah, so if you go back under Q&A, under contributing, the second one is, can I use a physical form instead of the online form? When you click that, you'll see this description, and then here this button that says download, and I'm going to click on that button. And I'm going to actually copy paste that link into the chat. All right, so you can access that form directly. And again, we do ask, even if you do fill that out, it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to accept that physical form. You can just use that as an intermediate, right? And then go onto the computer and enter that data for us.
Yep. Georgette has her hand raised, Irfan.
Oh, yeah. Let's ask to unmute. Or Georgette, you should be able to speak.
This is a temporary problem that I'll be facing this year about the starting time for collecting data. In the films that I saw, you said that we needed 5 plants to start off with. I'll have spirea, brattleby spirea blooming next week, and I'll probably have some azaleas still blooming and some daffodils, but I certainly will not have 5 plants blooming. Do I wait and not include the information that I would gather from this plant, or wait until I can have 5 plants?
So I think that's kind of a general recommendation to be able to see, to get kind of a general idea of some of the variation in the pollinator attractiveness of the different plants in your area. If you don't have 5, that's not a huge deal. That's not a deal breaker. You can still start. I would think, anyways, unless you think otherwise, Dr. Rebeck, I think you can start reporting.
I think so too. I think the most important thing, as we discussed earlier, is just making sure it's a 2x2 patch, right? Mm-hmm. Because we want to keep that standardized. So yeah, if you only have 1 or 2 plants blooming and you want to get started, just chomping at the bit to get out there and look at what's visiting your flowers, go for it.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
All right, let's see. I'll lower hand. Are there any other questions? I think that's it. I kind of covered some of the most common ones that come in through the Q&A section as well. And again, if you send us questions that are unique, that are not already in here, we will start adding them into this Q&A section. So if you ever have a question, you're unsure about something, we ask that you check this Q&A section real quick. You can also check that handout resource, right? This identification guide, which gives some general description and specifications on how to make observations as well. And if it's not covered in there, feel free to fire us an email. We'll be more than happy to answer, and again, include it in these resources so that we can have them there for you. I think that's it. I don't see any other questions coming in anywhere. So I want to thank.
Before we break and depart, I just wanted to maybe provide a little update on kind of where we're going with the data from this project ultimately.
Please do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we're planning. First of all, we're working on submitting a peer-reviewed manuscript or an article to American Entomologist. We're going to be working on that probably later this year and submitting that. That's kind of the flagship magazine for the Entomological Society of America. And I'll tell you, they love citizen science type work. And so we're, this fits the bill quite well. But again, like we talked about earlier, we definitely need to kind of standardize the data and make sure it's robust and make sure it's accurate so that that article gets accepted for publication. From a standpoint of you folks and your usability with the data, we're also going to be generating a fact sheet this year, which will incorporate data that we've accumulated thus far. So primarily from 2020 and maybe a little bit from 2019. As Dr. Rafai mentioned earlier, we had 2019 was kind of our learning curve and learning more about what not to do versus what to do or things to add as we moved along. And so we feel that 2020 data is probably more accurate and more reflective of what we're trying to get at than 2019. But nevertheless, we'll be putting a fact sheet together with data that we've generated so far. And that fact sheet will be updated periodically as we accumulate more data. It remains to be seen how long this project's going to be carried out. We were also looking for some grant money to possibly expand this project, get more people involved potentially. So we could be looking at doing this for a few more years yet. So kind of keep that in the back of your minds. There will be some product coming out of your efforts for generating this data for us. And so just be patient with us. We have many irons in the fire, lots of different projects that we're all involved in, but we will be providing some output for you folks to be satisfied with. And as Dr. Rafai mentioned earlier, we do provide those updated data sets periodically in that monthly newsletter and on the website where you can get some useful information kind of on the fly as we go and move forward. But we will have some more substantial publications for everybody to sink their teeth into soon enough. So stay tuned.
Yeah, a question that just came again was, can you say the name of the publication, please? And Donnie, as we publish any of these resources, we will send it out in the mailing list, and we will keep it on that project page as well. So y'all will be hopefully well aware as long as you're getting those emails of the publications and resources coming out of this. I just realized that Dr. Merchant was also with us here today. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. He's retired now for several months, but still involved and still helping out. So we appreciate your support with this project. And absolutely, just to kind of reiterate the sentiment that Mike just gave there in the chat. You as volunteers have really made this project incredibly successful. And I think, it's now our role to think of how to really generate some strong resources out of all the information you've generated. And this can be a really good model for future citizen scientist projects. I don't know of many other projects that have been quite this effective at collecting data, reliable data, and really good information. And as soon as we figure out this last piece of really generating some good publications and resources out of it, there's some possibilities for other types of citizen science projects that may be similar, that I know some of you have asked about native plants or asked about beneficial predators in the landscape and things like that there's all kinds of possible routes to go after this, to really increase our knowledge of our natural environment and how to be good stewards of our ecosystem. So thank you so much, really, for all your contributions in making this project as successful as it has been so far.
Absolutely.
All right. I think with that, thank you so much, Dr. Rebeck, for that update. And thank you all for attending the Q&A. We will post this webinar, this Q&A session for your viewing later on the project website. So feel free to go check that out, or let your other master naturalists or colleagues in the area know. And again, looking forward to your contributions this year. We'll keep in touch. Take care, everyone.